ADHD, dealing with it, member of your family, yourself, your children. My son has ADHD, goes this text from Catherine, and he's in GCSE Year 11 at the moment, and it's so tough. New GCSE regime is totally weighted against children with this condition. He'll do a vocational course at college next year, and we can't wait to get him into a different environment where he won't always be considered to be failing or a problem. Diagnosis and support all paid for privately, so little available from the NHS. Good morning. Living with ADHD. Whoa, let's go to... I don't know why I said that. I meant we will go to... yeah, that's the question. 08085 909 693. We have got Helen in Lancaster. Helen, good morning.
Hi.
Hi. Thanks for this. And Rob in Worthing as well.
Good morning.
Hello, Rob. Welcome. I want to hear you guys talk about this. Tony Lloyd's back. Spoke to Tony a long time ago. It was just about 6:35 this morning. He's the CEO of the ADHD Foundation. Hi, Tony. Welcome back.
Good morning.
So, Helen, over to you. Then Rob, and then Helen, and then Tony. I want to listen to this. What's your situation,
Helen?
Yeah.
Hi. I just texted in. Through primary school, my daughter's behaviour was handled because she's like popular and they did her best for her. Then high school, it got progressively worse. So you're going from actually started off as an A-star student, then was going down a grade every year. So it was really hard. And then by the end of school, I'm not knocking the teachers, but she was so bad. Like one of the teachers was saying she was in a different block. You couldn't even have her in the same building. And the lessons were, so she was on her own in a different room, and we had meetings. And I remember once there was about 7 kind of education people there. And I said, could it be ADHD? And they were like, no, she's bright. It's this and it isn't a correlation.
Oh,
yeah. And then what happened was, so every week I'd contact them, and if she'd had a good week, she got a phone, and if she'd not had a good week, she lost a phone, which is totally the wrong thing to do with a child with ADHD, because when we eventually got to a psychiatrist, they can't help the behaviour. And I think going to revise or do schoolwork, it's so hard because it's like 2 negative ends of a magnet, repelling each other, so they can't even sit down, never mind sort of go through a book. And I think sort of any achievements, that we have to really praise them because it's so difficult for them. And it's like living with a child. I think it's sort of like living with a high-speed bouncy ball that can be very angry. And she came home last week from uni, and my son and I were sitting there, and I said, it's like the people in America waiting for the hurricane to come, So when I took her out of the school and she went to a different sixth form, just because I said I can't go through another 2 years of this. And within 3 days there'd been an incident, and then it took like a year and a half to get to a psychiatrist. But it's the kind of 5 years before that, that people are, disorientated really. And it's not the teacher's fault, but I think if they had some basic indicators, if a child is doing this, and this, it's a possibility. And I'd also want to say as well, I think when they get the meds, it's not like having a bad knee and then you get medication. The meds, it's so hard to get the right dose, and then that isn't perfect. And one other thing as well, quickly, my dad had it. I'm sure he did. From his behaviour, it's sort of mirrored. It's exactly the same.
Really?
But it wasn't diagnosed then. And then my mum was a midwife for donkey's years, and she used to say, there's something not right, there's something not right. And when she was a baby, her fists were clasped as tight as they could possibly be under her chin, no matter how relaxing the environment was. And that's completely just me, but it's just interesting.
Well, let's throw that one out. Let's throw that one out. Rob, come in here. That's what a phrase there from Helen, a high-speed bouncing ball that's very angry. Do you recognise any of that?
None of it.
Some of
and that's
it?
Because, no, none of it, because I was diagnosed with ADHD 3 months ago at the age of 44.
3 months ago?
3 months ago, yeah, and but mine, as I understand it, there's 3 types. There's inattentive ADHD, which is what I have. There's hyperactive ADHD, and then there's the most common type, which is a mixture of the 2. So bouncing off the walls or high speed, I've never had any of that. I've always suffered from the inattentive kind, and that manifests itself in real inability to concentrate, extreme tiredness. So going through school, I think I had 2 older sisters, and they were always cleverer than me, really. And I think all my school reports tended to be pretty much the same, kind of awfully nice but dim. But I had a really structured upbringing. My parents were great, and so I achieved reasonably well, but more through sheer act of will. So through my life, I then went to work. I did an apprenticeship, but struggled like mad and discovered amphetamines. And it was like, wow, I just feel normal. And I just thought I had the energy everybody else had. So I've had episodes of depression and episodes where I've managed it okay, but that's when I've been doing my own thing. I went to university late, and I was fine then for that period of time because I could structure it myself and sleep when I wanted, and didn't realise any of this at the time. I just thought I was a bit dim, really, or struggled more.
Well, how terrible to have that upon yourself without when we spoke to a caller earlier on who was saying there was a similar trajectory, and then the diagnosis, and it was just the biggest relief. Was it like that with you?
Yeah, vindicated is the word.
Vindicated.
I almost didn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it because it's there are no blood tests or brain scans or anything like that. It's questionnaires, and you have one, and your parents have one, and your wife has one, and they fill it in. So looking back to when you were a child and now, and then you compare them, and everybody had circled the same numbers for the inattentive side. And then it wasn't until I had the medication that I thought, well, if this works, then I'll believe it. And it worked like a dream. I just felt so much better. And it's really interesting because other people I've read as well that your nose unblocks and like oxygen can get to your brain and suddenly you're thinking straighter and more clarity. It's difficult to explain.
Do you think back? Helen, you said it. You recognise it now in retrospect in your dad. It was your dad, wasn't it? I think you said, Helen. Yeah.
Yeah, like when I talk to relatives and they'll talk about his brother who was very successful and everything, I say, what about my dad? And they go, he was always in trouble, and it was just the stories you hear. And I definitely think that. And it's just I just admire people so much that manage to do anything. And I think what the psychiatrist told us as well is that people who suffer from it, when they like something, it's more manageable, like the chap was just saying, when he found something he wanted to do or could sleep, like my driving. If you like driving, you can be good at that. So it's a very complex thing, really, if you're not, it's not your kind of career to know about it. It's very, very complicated.
Yeah, Rob, but what about your family looking back?
That's so interesting that Helen says about her father. But so this all came about from my sister. So, I'd had recent problems again with addiction, and I've come through that, and lots of things have surfaced. And so it was my sister that had a chat with her friend because she's concerned about her son who's just having sort of issues. Again, he's got two older sisters who are a lot more switched on, and she was talking to a lady whose son had been diagnosed, and the more this lady spoke, she thought, oh yeah, that's like James. And then she thought, well, that's like my brother. It really reminded her of me growing up. And then I've subsequently read that it's as hereditary as height, or 77% hereditary. So she thinks James has got it. I thought, well, I'll go through it and be the guinea pig. I'm convinced my son's got it. And looking at my dad, I'm so sure he's got it. He's a really odd fish. But of course, in those days, you wouldn't entertain it, and you wouldn't entertain it now. But I'm convinced it is.
Wow.
It's gone through our family on the male side.
Tony Lloyd, CEO of the ADHD Foundation. To what extent is this hereditary? We're getting a lot of anecdotals on this.
The science tells us somewhere between sort of 70 and 80% hereditary, but that doesn't mean that mum's got ADHD or dad's got ADHD. It's a combination of the genes from both parents that is a factor. But we also know that there is a correlation between older parents. So we know there seems to be increased risk if the parents are older after conception, which if you think the average age to have your first child in the UK is 32 now, but also things like birth trauma and things like that can all kind of be a factor in triggering off that genetic potential.
Helen, do you want to come in here?
Hi. Yes, fine. My son, is 13. He was diagnosed 2 months ago. Our story is that he was a very, very difficult child. From the age of about 18 months, he'd throw tantrums. He wouldn't get dressed, but then he wouldn't get undressed. He wouldn't get in the bath, but then he wouldn't get out of the bath.
What did you think was going on?
We honestly had no clue. It was our first baby. We just thought this is what babies were like. When he got to the age of 3 or 4, we actually went to the doctor because we were really struggling to discipline him, to just sort of make sense of what was going on. And we asked to see a paediatrician, an educational psychologist, actually, which wasn't available. So we were referred to a paediatrician at our local hospital. And when we had that appointment, we were basically told that it was down to parenting. We were told that we were being inconsistent. He watched us with our son. We were trying to sort of keep him quiet so that we could talk to the doctor. And he was sort of in and out of toys, on and off our laps and so on. So the doctor decided that we were being inconsistent and that we should try different things like marbles in a jar or star charts or what have you. So we went away sort of thinking that we were bad parents and we weren't coping, and it was all down to us.
How awful for you, having that burden on you, think, and the self-doubt too.
Yes, absolutely. We kind of knew it wasn't us because our daughter, our second child, is very, very different. But still, we were left with this very challenging child to cope with no help. So we didn't really know where to turn. So we just kind of tried to make the best of it. We've had times where we felt that we perhaps wouldn't have any happy memories of his childhood because things were so stressful and difficult. And we've kind of sort of muddled through, really. And it's taken till this year for him to actually say, Mum, I think I've got ADHD. I've done a test online and I tick all the boxes.
Wow. So where do you go from here?
Well, following that, we talked to school and we went to a doctor and said, we'd like to investigate this. We've got a list of behaviours here that he's reporting to us and that we're experiencing. And we've been referred to, it's called Healthy Young Minds at our local hospital. And he's been diagnosed with ADHD. So now that we know, it all makes sense. All the behaviours that we've experienced over the years suddenly make sense.
Let me bring Rob in here. Imagine if you'd been diagnosed at that age, Rob, how that would have changed your life.
Yeah, I'm sure it would have changed it incredibly. It's in the short time I've been diagnosed, I've earned more money. I know that sounds crass, but the productivity, my productivity is gone through the roof, and so I work for myself. And you just imagine what's been lost over the years. But interestingly, is your son on medication? Helen, is it Helen?
It is, yes. Hi, he's just started. He's been on it for about 2.5 weeks. And so we haven't got the dose right yet. He's just really sort of being introduced to it and settling down onto it. Yeah. So we do feel it's making a difference, but we don't think he's on the right dose just yet.
It's made a real difference with my daughter, I've got to say. What about you, Rob? Medication?
Yeah, so I started the medication a couple of 6 weeks ago, and it's instant, really. Within an hour of taking it,
is it instant focus? You can actually concentrate on something.
Yeah. Yes, and as I say, it's quite imperceptible. You don't feel a buzz or anything like that. You just I feel I can breathe easier, and it's bizarre. The concentration just clicks in, and you're calmer, even though I had inattentive, not hyperactive. Interestingly, it's the same drug for both, so I'm not quite sure how that works.
How does that work, Tony?
I think there are a number of issues
and
here.
There are a range of different drugs, I would have thought.
Yeah, but it's also, NICE guidelines actually recommend a multimodal approach, so medication isn't appropriate for everybody. There are different types of medication. It just seems really quite sad that, in most parts of the UK, medication is the only thing that's offered, really. And even the people who make these medications say they shouldn't be used in isolation. They're not a cure, they do help. But, there's knowledge that you need to have in the same way if you had diabetes, for example. You need somebody really to sit down and explain to you, look, this is the condition, this is how it affects you, and these are the lifestyle choices that you should make so that you can self-manage it effectively and live a happy, healthy and successful life. And, sometimes that also means things like cognitive behavioural therapy and things like that. And one of the things that's not been mentioned so far is, low emotional resilience is frequently co-occurring with ADHD. So we see really high levels of anxiety and depression and self-harm and eating disorders amongst people with untreated ADHD. So it's really important that, an assessment's made early and that, there is a proper discussion really about what treatment, what interventions are needed, and that it's monitored so that, if that person is in difficulty at any stage, they know that there are other things they can access apart from medication.
Mm.
So, sorry, can I just jump in there?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so I've come to it almost from the other way. So I was trying to figure out what was causing my depression, and I'd been on antidepressants, and I'd had therapy, and nothing really seemed to work. So the medication did really work for me. And it's interesting that you mentioned diabetes. So my son, who I'm concerned also has ADHD, is type 1 diabetic, and he's the worst person in the world to have that condition because he just doesn't manage it very well. He doesn't concentrate on what he should be doing, and so it's particularly challenging.
Let's bring in Solly, who was on the line a few moments ago, but it was fleeting because the line went down. Solly, are you there now?
Yes, I'm there. I'm sorry about that. I'm not really sure what happened. Gremlins on my phone this morning.
It's probably gremlins in our studio. So is your son, what's your son's situation?
So my son is 29 now. He's an adult. And as a child, he was so hyperactive, just all over the place. He was just like a little ant that was just scurrying around, constantly on the move. He was socially awkward, isolated. The other children just didn't get him. I like that expression, odd fish. He was always in trouble at school. I was the parent that was called in constantly to have a chat. He was labelled as naughty. I was isolated as a parent because it was almost like ADHD was contagious, so the other parents didn't include me.
Well, in a sense of they just didn't want that sort of so-called bad behaviour to rub off. Yeah.
Correct, and he wasn't invited to any birthday parties.
Oh God, that's the one thing that makes me seethe.
Yeah,
it really does.
Yeah, and this was back in the 80s, and people didn't really understand ADHD then. It wasn't particularly given the credence it is now, thank goodness. I think because I'm also a teacher. I think now, as soon as we hear ADHD, I think as professionals, we take it much more seriously. Saying that, there are still tons of things that schools could be doing better because children are still being labelled as naughty and parents are still being blamed as bad parents. So it's just so encouraging hearing, like Rob's story, that he can turn things around. One thing I wanted to say as well, so my son, who is now an adult, he used to take medication, but he didn't like the feeling. He didn't like it; made him feel too quiet. So he stopped taking it. The consequence of that now is that he makes so many bad, poor decisions. I mean, he's still very disorganised, but the big worry is that he makes poor financial decisions. So he can just get credit cards. There's nothing to stop him just getting himself into huge trouble because he's not able to sit down and clearly make those decisions. The other thing, sorry to take up your time, is that us as parents are just struggling on our own. And I think it was Helen who said, our children are given the support and the help at school, possibly through a consultant with some medication. But then what? Then we're left with no behaviour plans. no way of knowing what to do at home with our children and the long summer holidays and weekends. So I set up my own consultancy to help families, because there's just nothing out there to support families. So it's called Yellow Sun. Just because I was just sick and tired of just seeing parents struggling and feeling like I felt, which was just so lonely and not included, and just, and I'd watch other families and they'd be in a restaurant and it'd be fine and they'd all be happy, and there'd be no, jumping up and down and rudeness and throwing chairs, and, and I just feel so tragically sorry that there's no overall general support for families.
We are not taking up our time at all, as you said earlier on, because that was so important what you said, and what you're doing is terrific as well. Listen to this. Listen to this text here. Dear 5 Live, at 53, I'm hoping you may have saved my life. From what I've heard about ADHD today, it could be the diagnosis I'm looking for after years of all kinds of troubles. That's from Roy in Devon. And if you heard Rob in Worthing, that was kind of not with us anymore, but that's kind of his story as well. And I bet you've had a lot of mums and dads with your support groups saying, at last there's some people totally to talk to who've been through what I'm going through. Yeah. Yeah,
totally. I mean, there's just nothing out there. I belong to Facebook groups, and in fact at 9:30 I need to go because I'm actually running a support group this morning.
I'll let you go.
No, that's okay. But just. It is a real condition. It is not down to bad parenting. There are some amazing parents out there doing fantastic jobs, but our children are struggling. They're feeling lonely. They're feeling, what Tony said about low emotional resilience. Our children their self-esteem is on the floor, because all they're ever told is they're naughty and they don't fit in and there's something wrong, and why can't you just sit still, and why can't you behave? And as I think the lady right at the beginning said, it's like the magnets. It's not. There's no control over it. They just cannot. So we need to change their world in order for them to live comfortably and safely, and we need to raise their self-esteem and make them feel brilliant and amazing about themselves, because ADHD is not the end. I mean, there's so many amazing people in society who have ADHD, and that energy and that buzz of ADHD.
Rory Bremner spoke about it recently, didn't he?
Yes, correct. Yes.
And there's a fast brain that flashes along in a wonderful way.
Yeah, exactly. So, it can be channeled and it can be used for positive, but unfortunately our school system means that children have to sit and conform and walk in straight lines and sit on the carpet and not fiddle and focus for 20 minutes. Well, our children can't do that. So, this is another bugbear of mine, is schools, but we need to change our stupid Victorian system where we have to learn skills that we just don't need anymore. We need to make schools much more able to accommodate all of our children's needs, not just ADHD. But why do we need children just focusing on handwriting and times tables, whereas our children are able to sit and problem solve?
You said some amazing things, and I've just got to tell you, it's 9:31. Are you? You've got to.
I've got a few minutes. I'm sure my mums won't mind if I'm a bit late.
Well, you said it brilliantly. We've got to go to the news, weather and sport. But listen, thank you. I'm so pleased we got the line back after it went down.
Yeah, I'm delighted. So thank you, and thank you for all the amazing work, and keep up. And all those parents with children with ADHD, it's not a sentence. It's not a lifelong problem. We can use it to the benefit of our children.
But as you say,
we have to raise their self-esteem and make them feel brilliant about themselves. That
was your phrase, self-esteem on the floor. Thank you very much. So, good morning, Emily in Ely, and Rachel in Reading, and Josie in London. Good morning, all this Friday morning.
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 Good morning.
We are talking about ADHD. I want to throw this one at you before we find out about your own individual circumstances. I try and reflect the texts that come in, and this does not reflect the the view of management. But this says, I'm sorry, but this discussion on ADHD is so blinkered. I've worked in education for 10 years as a teacher and support worker, and the consistent theme I've seen in kids with the condition is parents who have a lack of discipline and boundaries at home, unable to accept any criticism. And another one here, 90% of ADHD cases are excuses for never say no modern parenting. Right. Who wants to deal with that?
Well, actually, it's Emily here from Ely.
Hi, Emily. Hi.
Hello. Well, actually, that was the main point I wanted to speak about with schools and the support within the system, because like your other callers, my husband and I have seen our son through a diagnosis, 2 different kinds of medication.
But when you hear attitudes like that expressed, that must infuriate you.
It does, because absolutely, that's why I wanted to speak about schools, because even from preschool right through to he's just started senior school or high school or college, it is absolutely there within the school system. And the other caller who was a teacher and said that it's much changed, it probably is from the 1980s, but it is still very much there. We've been told at preschool that don't get him statemented, don't get him in any kind of support, because then he'll be labelled and he'll be treated differently, to then when we decided we had to then headmistress saying there's no Senko support. If you want to do this, you're going to have to do the paperwork yourself or help us do the paperwork. So then when we did do that and got him diagnosed and he got offered medication, to his actual teacher at the time saying, don't do this, pulling us to one side and saying, don't medicate him, it will be the worst thing you can ever do. There's lots of unknown about it. And judging us for doing that. So it is totally there within the education system, and it takes a lot of strength as parents to follow your gut and really find your own way to do what's best for your child, because you're their chief educator. No one knows them better than you. But it does take a lot of resilience as a parent, and it saddens me that attitude is still there with professionals that you leave your children with, and leave them in their you leave your child in their care.
How prevalent do you think it is? I mean, you've had bad experiences, but how much do you think it is out there still?
I think it's out there. For us, we've found it more in primary school. Already in secondary school, there seems to be a lot more awareness. I think it is depending on the school. It depends on the county, the funding and what resources. It differs hugely between counties as well, but it is there. And it's definitely there within the parents who can be governors at the school or have an influential position in the school, go in and help with classes. They can bring that attitude into the school environment as well.
It's been such a struggle for you. I can hear that. I can hear as well the determination. We're going to bring in Rachel and Josie. Emily, see what you think about what Rachel and Josie have got to say. Hello, Rachel.
Hi.
It's all yours.
I was mislabelled with lots and lots of really negative labels when I was a teenager. I was lazy. I was disorganised. I mean, I actually have I found recently a picture that I took of a photograph, kind of like my school report from year 10, saying that I was dishonest. I hope for a more honest attitude, and for it's incredibly difficult to get homework out of me. All these different things, but I was labelled so badly with all these different labels. I was only diagnosed last year at the age of 36 when my sister-in-law over in the United States was diagnosed with ADHD. And when any of my friends is kind of diagnosed with anything, I thought, I wonder what that's like. And I always research it a little bit to see if I can modify my own behaviour in any way to make theirs a little easier. So I researched it, and it was like looking at a colour photograph of myself. It was like a shopping list of every single thing that I have ever struggled with.
Really?
And I think there was like a 1 to 10 of kind of 10 things which you wish you could have told your teenage ADHD self. Number 1, I nodded sagely. Number 2, I gasped. Number 3 through, I think probably I reached about 6 or 7 before my attention span gave out. And I just sat there and cried because it all made sense. And then I sat in a consultant psychiatrist's office being diagnosed in April 2016. And when she said the words, "You are quite an obvious case of somebody who has ADHD, and until now it has had a profound effect on your life," I just sat there and cried. Because it was like somebody saying, there was all these, imagine wearing a jacket with all those negative labels that you wear on a daily basis that everybody else sees and thinks that's who you are. And it's like Post-it notes stuck to your clothes. And when somebody says to you, take off your jacket, and you realise that underneath you're okay, those labels belong to ADHD, not to me.
You got to number 6 until your attention span gave out. That's a fascinating phrase.
I heard somebody. I turned onto on the driving back from the school run, which is where I picked up this debate. And it was somebody who said it's like two opposite ends of a magnet, and that nearly made me cry, because that is exactly how it is. It's so much easier as a child to say, I forgot my book, miss, rather than, well, I spent 4 hours looking at all the questions, reading them about 9 million times, answering them all inside my head, but for some reason I couldn't organise my thoughts enough to get them down into my book and on paper. It's just so much easier to say, I forgot my book, rather than actually be honest. And then face the ridicule of teachers. And I'm really, really sad to hear that there are some teachers who have the attitude that ADHD is not an actual thing and it's just a result of bad parenting. Because I would really like them to meet my 3 siblings who actually have got on really well in life, who are really successful. There is nothing more frustrating than realising you're sat with your peers at school thinking, hang on a minute, I'm cleverer than they are, because you always have a measure of kind of where you are, kind of like what set you're in at school and whatever. I'm cleverer than they are, but how come they get the grades and how come they get all the success and how come they're able to do the work, but I can't? But I'm capable of it, but I can't do it. The thing is, you've got all this evidence. You've got no evidence to the contrary. You feel like I had a raging sense of injustice about having these labels applied to me, but I had no evidence to the contrary. So you have to go on what you're presented with. So therefore, I kind of believe that these labels did stick to me, and I did belong. I did have these. They did belong to me. So it was a liberating thing to have somebody confirm everything which I had struggled with. And I now take medication. I mean, in the words of the lady who diagnosed me, who was wonderfully kind, she said that pills don't build skills, but what they do is they enable you to then kind of be capable of building skills. So they're not a magic cure-all, and it's not going to make up for 36 years of not having the ability to build those skills of kind of executive function is what they call. So for that is for people kind of diverting their attention to where they want it to, not to where it just ends up. And that's the problem. It's the fact that I would like to have diverted my attention to those places, but for some reason I was not able to do it.
But the pills, you're right, don't build skills. With my own daughter, ADHD inattentive subtype, it's a question of, right, now we can start again and do this. Now we can
absolutely.
Now we can refocus.
It gives you the opportunity to build skills. But another thing which is kind of really difficult to deal with is a lot of people are saying, well, you clearly don't have ADHD. I don't know why you're taking the medication. It looks different in between boys and girls and also between the different subtypes. So, I mean, I know that ADD has now been reclassified as ADHD, primarily an attentive type. I have combined type, which is I've got like a Ford Fiesta brakes on a Ferrari brain is the way I've heard it described as well.
Isn't the brain the most fantastically intricate but complex and mystifying organ?
I would not swap having ADHD for all the tea in China, because the things it gives me, I would not want to do without.
You think
so
quick?
The creativity, the passion, the fast thinking.
Oh, yeah.
When you find something... it's like you click with it, and you can. I'm a very fast learner. When I'm doing something which kind of fits my natural aptitudes, which are kind of arts and languages based. Science and maths. Science I was reasonable at, but maths is I got a B. I don't know how at GCSE, and then dropped it as soon as I possibly could after that. B was good enough, thanks. But the fact that I went through the GCSEs, I went to A-levels. I bombed horribly. I went from GCSEs. I did 1 year in a sixth form college with no bells, no lesson plans, no kind of timetable given to you. It was your responsibility to make sure that you got places. I failed epic that year. So the following year, I went into, luckily, I mean, my parents said that they would pay for me to go to an independent school for 2 years to do my A-levels, and I'm incredibly fortunate for that, because I turned down the opportunity the previous year because I didn't want to go there.
But if I could say you don't have it anymore, you could say, no, thank you very much. I want to carry on having it because there are so many positives. Listen, Rachel, we've got Josie in London as well. Hello, Josie.
Hi.
Now, you've got ADHD, I believe.
Yes.
Diagnosed not so long ago. Would you like not to have it?
That's a good question. I think there are some really brilliant things that I think it is kind of responsible for. As a part of me, I think it definitely does make you more creative. It can make you more aware of things outside of a concentrated situation. Like, say, if you're in a social group, I think I am quite good at recognising if someone's on the outside and thinking about how that could help, or sometimes having forethought about things. And I'm constantly curious and interested in so many different things, which makes me feel I'll never get bored. However, I am constantly frustrated because it's like I'm following every tangent possible. In every 3 seconds, I've thought about 30 different ways I could go with something, and reining that in and just thinking, okay, I'll start with one, is a serious, serious challenge. Organising yourself mentally and then practically, of course, as well, and even emotionally, is a real challenge. And I agree what Rachel said about being able to just get to a point of being able to build the skills to organise yourself in those ways. That's really what I'm striving for. I'm hoping to get some I think it's good that if you have someone consistent on hand who you can kind of say, look, I just need you to help me just bullet point these things and work out what is, what should be at the top of the pile.
Absolutely.
Absolutely fascinating. Yeah. That creativity, that quick thinking, but that description there of this kind of this explosion of thought, which could go out like the Big Bang, everything going in all sorts of different directions. Yeah, I want you all to listen to and maybe give advice to Tom in Stroud, who's there.
Hello,
hello, Tom. Now,
you all right?
You have been listening to this and you thought, hang on a minute, this could be me. Go on.
Yeah, pretty much everything. What your previous caller just said. Is it Josie?
Yeah.
Yeah, she said it rang bells with me. Everything she just said is pretty much exactly like me. I feel like there's loads of things I need to do, but I can't physically do them all at once. And then I start to feel really overwhelmed and confused with what to do first. I mean, simple things like ironing shirts for work. It's like I find it very difficult. I procrastinate on things, and then it just builds up and builds up and builds up. And I can't sit still. I'm constantly thinking. When people are talking to me, my mind's wandering, and just pretty much everything that Josie just said is exactly the same for me. It's really overwhelming sometimes. It feels like a hamster wheel constantly going round in my brain. And, yeah, pretty much.
And at school?
Very unbearable. At school, I didn't really pay much attention. I was on report from year 8 in secondary school. Didn't really pay much. I can't really remember primary school. Didn't do well at all. I've had a great upbringing. My parents were great. I had good foundations, and I'm on to my second career. I was a welder, now I'm a sales rep. So I got taught how to be a human properly, but
how to be a human properly? No, there are many different. We come in many different forms,
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I had a good upbringing. I got taught good morals and how not to break the law, and you know what I mean.
Oh, I got you. Yeah, I got you.
I also had a very good upbringing, and I think having a good base and lots of things to do to keep me busy all the time meant that largely my ADHD went completely unnoticed as a child, because I remember I tried to get a diagnosis a couple of years ago, and I felt that the first time I tried, I failed, and it essentially came down to the doctor I was talking to giving the impression that you're not a 9-year-old boy who's out of his seat all the time, therefore you can't have ADHD. But the more I tried to think back to myself at that age, and thought, well, maybe I didn't have it then. I realised I completely did. I just channeled it in very different ways. I was at my seat all the time when I didn't have to be following rules, because I did want to follow the rules. But at school, I think until the age of 11 or 12, I don't think I had to, they asked if you concentrate. I don't think I had to. I was very bright. I was very lucky. And I would just work, and then I'd do the extension, and then I'd doodle, and then I'd start getting out of my seat and talking way too much. So in some ways, I was lucky to not have that disruptive element and behavioural problems when I was a child. But it also meant that it kind of went unnoticed for a while.
Yeah, Tom, are you had this occurred to you before you heard this, or has it been something that's been on your mind for a while?
No, it's not really occurred to me. Maybe I hadn't really thought about it much, but just listening to this, kind of a lot of the things that were said kind of made sense to me why I behave like that.
Well, another one here, this program, this is a text, this program may change my life. So much of this describes my life perfectly. How best to get diagnosed at age 42, asks Jason in Wimbledon. Where would you go? Where would your first stop be? Emily, Rachel, Josie?
I went to my GP with a shopping list of all the reason why I thought I had ADHD and asked to be referred to somebody. Now, the thing which really makes me angry is depending on where you are in the country. I mean, I know recently I'm on a few Facebook.
So where should I know that postcode thing? But where should Tom? I mean, listening to Tom, do you think he could be onto something here?
Yeah, go and talk to somebody about it. Go and read as much as you can. That's kind of a bit ironic, really, telling somebody with ADHD to go and read stuff.
Yeah, I can't concentrate on reading.
Exactly. Or either that, or do you have somebody who you kind of would help you to do it? I mean, because I must give a massive, huge shout out to my long-suffering husband who has known me since I was 15, and we've been married 10 years. He helps me so much. I cannot tell you what the support of somebody who loves you and accepts you as you are has done for me. And so he does. He kind of, I think it was Josie who was saying about sort of not knowing where to start. I quite often tell him everything that is going on with my brain. He will then give me actually, have you thought about doing this first? And gives me the reason because. And actually just that kind of that little bit of a somewhere to start then makes the whole chaos then make sense.
The chaos makes sense, yeah. I've heard some of the most wonderful phrases and descriptions and little nuggets in the last hour or so. Tom, can I recommend, perhaps Tony Lloyd was on earlier on, for a starting point for anyone. He's the CEO of the ADHD Foundation. And I'm sure, I don't have it handy, I'm so sorry, maybe somebody will get it to me, but we've not got much time left. But I'm sure you can find the ADHD Foundation, online and get their number.
Yeah, I'll have a look,
ring them up and ask, first stop, where do I go? How do I take this ahead? I think that's probably the way to go. It's really, really great you contacted us, and we've got.
Thank you. Yeah.
We've got Jill.
Hi, Nikki.
You were diagnosed when? We haven't got a lot of time, Jill, but it's good to have you on.
No. Oh, I'm so excited, and I don't know the gentleman's name that was just speaking then. You will be fine. I am so pleased by this program that one person, two people, this is the message we're trying to put across to bring this out. I was diagnosed about 11 years ago. I always knew I was different. I'm 53. My son at age 2, I knew he was different. It often happens that way. At school, I was, as the lady said, I was hauled in so much. I felt, victimized almost, because it was so sad. I was like, what do I do? He then was diagnosed. As the diagnosis came up, all his symptoms, it's the light bulb moment. I'm like, that's what I've got. Oh my gosh. When you have a broken leg, you go to a hospital, they put it in a cast, everyone can see it, it's made better. When you have a difference in your brain, it needs to be spoken about. We need to be more open. It's nobody's fault. We are all different. ADHD is the most fantastic thing to have. I am so happy. I would not swap it for the world. But we need to make this
so accessible. We need a central point where people and our GPs to be able to, when we go in.
Let me give Jill. You've been brilliant. You've been brilliant. But let me just give the website, adhdfoundation.org.uk. I wish you all well. Have a great weekend, and thank you very much for your contributions.